Leigh, welcome to Conversations with Peter Boghossian. Thanks for coming on and having a conversation with me.
Delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. I think Jordan Peterson told me about you and your work and your story, and I find it really interesting. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself. And you graduate and undergraduate at Oxford. Very interesting background that you have with medicine and teaching. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, I'll try to keep it brief. Yes, I did both my degrees at Oxford University in chemistry, so I have a doctorate. And after that, I decided to go to North America to do postdoctoral work at some of the top hospitals here in Toronto, in Canada, where I reside now. And after that, I was involved for 7 years in biotechnology companies. So I was in a startup, ended up founding a company that was listed on the NASDAQ, actually. And shortly after that, was recruited to academia, largely because of that experience in industry, somewhat to be an administrator to run one of these professional programs that you'll have heard about, a bit like an MBA, but with scientific content. And I did that for about 17 years. And then more recently was subject to, well, I would say dismissal, but there were rumblings in the administration that really I wasn't on board with their ideology, I think, and so that led to me volunteering to step down from that position. But I'm a tenured professor, so I continue to teach, and organic chemistry is my kind of field of specialty. And more lately, I've been publishing.
Okay, so just so you know, I know literally nothing about chemistry. Like, I know salt and water.
Do you know salt? You sure?
Isn't it NaCl? Is that what it is?
Yeah, NaCl. That's a good start. Yeah, well, that's fine. I mean, I know
I don't know what it is. I think it's what it is. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's a tough subject.
Chemistry.
It's a famously tough subject, right?
Especially
organic chemistry.
My mentor told me that there are certain fields that correspond high. People who have high IQs and people have low IQs, and you don't really need a high IQ to do. No, let me hold on. Let me take that back. Let me make sure I got this right. Chemists. Okay, forget it. I can't remember exactly what he told me. So actually, I just wasted 2 minutes of everybody's time. So I apologize about that. Okay,
oh, that's a shame. That's a shame.
Your cancellation in STEM is fascinating, and I want to talk. So you were canceled, and you have a lot of tension between you and your chair, to say the least.
Yeah,
so I wanted to talk about what happened to you there.
Well, I mean, so I'm not going to discuss the specifics of the case in the sense that, I'm not supposed to, and so I won't. But let me put it this way, right? A few years ago, I began to read those student opinion surveys that they do on us. And can I just make this remark about the fact that when I come to North America and they told me that, oh, you'll be evaluated by the students you're teaching, that blew me away for a start off. I mean, that's not something at Oxford when I was there was a thing. I mean, these were people. Yeah, we went there and learned at the feet of the masters, right? I mean, the idea was that there was expertise and they were in the job for a reason, and we didn't really get to gainsay them in anything. So I was really surprised that this is how it was going to be. And, I mean, the parallel is with medicine, I suppose, which is, doctors do what their patients ask, right? So I used to read those then, and you started to see some pretty critical kind of commentary, and I'll give you an example at some point, maybe later. I want to teach you some chemistry at some point. That's why.
Teach me some chemistry. Yeah. Who do you want to teach? You want to teach me chemistry?
Yeah. Why not? Why not? Anyone can do it. It's perfectly fine.
Well, that's
I know. I got you to laugh on it, but so we could talk about the chemistry of carbon. So why is life based on carbon? That would be a question.
I actually asked Dawkins that question. So what
did he say?
I have my own hypothesis. You go ahead. You tell me.
Oh, well, I know, but I'm going to tell you is correct, whereas what you might say is just an assertion. So what do you think?
Well, I don't think it has to be by necessity because it's an N of 1. You don't have a large enough sample size to know if life can be.
Well, yeah. Okay. So I think we can kind of fairly much dismiss that. I mean, so all life in the universe is most likely to be based on carbon. because of its inherent characteristics, because chemistry is all about the behavior of electrons at the surface of atoms and molecules and the way in which they interface with other atoms and molecules, right? So it's everything. It's a sort of veneer on the surface of atoms and molecules that are doing the interaction. And carbon has this unique capacity to behave in a certain way, and it can have 4 bonds, which is not unique. I mean, that can happen elsewhere too, but they're very short and strong bonds that it forms, and pretty much carbon's the only one that can do that. It also has the capacity to form double bonds, which is a special kind of bond, and you'll have heard about this with our other friend, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide has 1 carbon and 2 oxygens, and the carbon is forming 2 bonds to each oxygen on either side. So it's a total of 4 bonds to the carbon. And that sort of bonding is unique, actually, to carbon, because silicon, which is directly underneath carbon on the periodic table, should behave the same, but it doesn't because it's unable to form the double bonds. So silicon dioxide, which is probably the source of most oxygen on the planet, actually, because it's all in the earth, it's in the crust, it's that silicon dioxide. Well, it's a solid, not a gas, right? It's a very different sort of chemistry right there. So we are based on carbon because it has this multiplicity of bonds. And
so I'm still not sure why carbon is unique for life. Like, why couldn't sentience contain itself in hydrogen?
There's not enough possibility for complexity, right? So for life you need complexity, and so you need complex molecules to build that life. And so the molecules are inherently complex in the number of bonds they can form to other atoms, right? So that's partially one of the reasons. I would say the other reason, have you ever thought about this? What's more stable, would you say, carbon dioxide or carbon itself? I mean, if you have a lump of carbon, would you consider the lump of carbon, like charcoal on your barbecue, would you consider that to be more stable, or would you think CO2 is more
less stable?
Right, less stable. Well, you'd be correct, because CO2 is the more stable form. So that's why barbecues burn, although they take a while to get started, don't they? So the reason they're difficult to get started is you have to put energy in at the beginning to start the reaction.
Okay.
So that's an important part of this. So human beings, like us, are built of carbon, and we all want to be carbon dioxide, actually. But we don't just burst into flames, or at least I don't know anyone who has, but I mean, perhaps it happens, but we're in an oxygen environment, but we don't burst into flames. And that's because there's a strong barrier, right? So the idea of carbon-carbon bonds as the basis of life is pretty fundamental. And I don't see anything else on the periodic table that could really lead to the same sort of chemistry. So we have a whole chemistry specifically for this, and that's organic chemistry. That's my subject.
God, I want to plumb this just for a second before we talk about other things, because this is very interesting to me. So you need, so the assertion is that you need complexity for life, and it then follows that when you have life, you have some degree of sentience. Although you could ask whether a mollusk is sentient or not, but in order to have any kind of life, you need complexity, and you can't get that through the molecular bonds of other
elements. Can't produce so many complex molecules. So I mean, for example, you are mostly made of carbon-based molecules, like proteins. We hear about proteins all the time. Proteins in your
I've
diet.
Never been so offended in my life. No,
yeah, I know. Well, you see how I can end up. You can see how I can end up insulting students, right? By making these assertions, right? They're like, "How dare you suggest that I'm made up of proteins?" So a protein is a carbon chain, right? It's a carbon chain. But yeah, the reason that you can hang about and get life essentially as a result is because of evolution. Evolution takes a long time.
I was just going to go there. Yeah.
Right? Evolution takes a long time, right? So we need very, very long periods of time. And we need the molecules that are involved in life to hang around long enough. Otherwise, they'll all just convert to CO2. If everything converted to CO2 immediately, there'd be no opportunity for life and complexity. So what you as an individual or any human being is trapped somewhere between carbon, pure carbon, and carbon dioxide. You're on a sort of like, imagine it's a waterfall of energy, but you're kind of trapped in one of those pools sort of halfway down, and you can't get over the barrier unless I come and light you with a blowtorch. But it's essentially, life is all trapped in between carbon and carbon dioxide in an oxygen environment. So because it takes such a long time for those reactions to happen, there's time for evolution to take place.
Oh, so that was actually my, I don't know enough about it to say counterexample, but my question, my point, and again, I'm kind of thinking out loud here. I don't mean to be impertinent with these questions. So you mean so the argument is that even if you had more basic elements, you couldn't kind of graft life onto that, or life couldn't emerge from that? And
I don't see a way around it, no, because the fundamentals of the physics that underpins chemistry, it's all about energy, right? So the whole thing is about energy. The universe has got a finite amount of energy, and that energy is being dispersed over an ever larger volume, which means that the density of energy in the universe is always decreasing. And so everything is moving downhill energetically. And so that's why all reactions proceed that way. And many reactions will proceed spontaneously. So if I, take some butane gas, and again, I still have to light it, but it'll go pretty rapid, right? So many reactions go spontaneously, but with carbon, certainly with the complex molecules, there's a real barrier to that. So, a diamond that you give to your fiancée or whatever, making an assumption again, doesn't burst into flames, right? They say a diamond is forever, but that's actually not true. A diamond will eventually, in an oxygen environment, become CO2. It's just very, very, very slow, right? So all life is trapped in these sort of kinetic wells, as we refer to them, really. So you
kinetic,
can't.
wow, that's awesome. Kinetic well.
Kinetic well, yeah.
That's awesome. So is this the because I've actually not wondered with any serious intent, but I've actually kind of vaguely pondered that question for a long time. So is this view that all life has to be carbon based? Is this a standard view among chemists?
Well, I think organic chemists would tell you that, because you just don't see the same multiplicity of reactions and structures with other chemistries, right? So there's a chemistry all across the periodic table. There's some really fascinating chemistry elsewhere on the periodic table, but the complexity we see in carbon is uniquely complex. And this is why all the drug molecules are built on carbon structures, right? So the entire pharmaceutical industry is based on organic chemistry. So it is. I think it's the top priority for chemists to look at carbon chemistry. So organic chemists are bound to support me on that. But yeah, so I don't see much in the way of the same level of diversity. Oh, there's that word.
Diversity.
Yeah, diversity. We need to be more diverse. We need to include other elements in the game, in the life game. It's extremely unfair. Discriminatory. But I would also say, Peter, that we mustn't rule out the others, because elements like nitrogen and oxygen make an enormous impact on the chemistry of carbon as well. So they're super important.
So I was going to ask, is that so? Do you think? And I don't want to spend time. Probably everybody's rolling their eyes about this.
Yeah, like what? Why are they talking about science? Stop talking about science.
Do you think? Is the claim that that's a matter of necessity, that life could only emerge with carbon? Is that a necessary claim? Could you imagine a situation in which, I don't know,
vanadium is the basis of life, for instance?
Well, yeah, and they were subject to some kind of particular.
No, I think the simple answer is no. I can't. No.
Wow.
I'm going to make that claim. I'm going to make that claim.
That's a strong claim.
Yeah.
And I just don't have the domain specific expertise.
Depends what you mean by life, of course. Biological life. We might have life in silicon because of AI, if that qualifies.
Yeah, the initial cause, not what's come subsequently, not any of our creations.
I don't see it happening. I think Dawkins would agree with me. If life were to emerge, we found life elsewhere in the universe, it's likely to be based on carbon chemistry. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is going to sound utterly ridiculous, but I'm going to say it anyway. So the way you figured that out was through, or the way that we figure stuff out in general in science is through the scientific method, hypothesis testing, etc. So now correct me if I'm wrong, but there are Indigenous science mandates at the University of Toronto. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, since 2017, I think there was a
Okay.
Truth and Reconciliation sub-steering committee at the University of Toronto, and they published a report, and there were 34 recommendations, I think. And yeah, it's basically number 17 halfway through that list. I mean, 34 is quite a long list, isn't it? Number 17 is that all departments in all disciplines across the university will, by 2025, include substantive components of Indigenous science and knowledge into their curricula.
Okay. So let me ask you this question. So you're trying to figure out if carbon is by necessity the basis for life.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say that you're a sincere inquirer and you don't have any axe to grind. You just want to figure out what's true. And you have a group of other people who have no axe to grind, and they're just trying to figure out what's true. Let's say that Indigenous science mandates. I don't even know. Do Indigenous? Do they have a concept of carbon? I don't know. I mean, when did
Probably
they?
not. No. Well, not in the same way we do. No.
Yeah, not in the same way we do. I mean, so if something,
well, I mean, none of it was written down for a start off.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, what technologies? What I mean. Okay, so let me stick with the point. So if there's something in, I was going to say a canon, but they don't really have a canon of knowledge. If there's something in a folklore of Indigenous science that contradicts,
well, that could be true. Oh, that contradicts. Okay.
Well, that contradicts. How does an independent external person with no axe to grind, with no bias, how do they figure out how to adjudicate the claim when you come in with science and somebody else comes in with a folktale?
Well, I can prove it. Right. So I get, for example, right. I mean, let's say we were trying to design a molecule to cure something. I could sit down at a piece of paper and I could draw out a molecule. I wouldn't know if it's going to work, but then having designed the molecule, because we have a structural way of representing molecules that many of your viewers will have seen, lots of hexagons and things like that. Having designed it, I could propose a way to build it from scratch, which we could go into the laboratory. We could then build it and prove that we built it because we have mechanisms to do that. Like NMR is one of them, but so people know about magnetic resonance imaging, things like that. We have a similar way of proving that we've done the thing we've done, and then we would test it, right, to see if it did the job that we thought it was going to do, like cure something. And we could probably do that in animals. I know that's always a little traumatic for people, but it's better than putting it in your grandmother, I suppose. And then eventually you test it out on people. I mean, we've been through the COVID business just lately, right? So we could prove it. It's demonstrable. And so this is the point about objective truth, isn't it? And I think that starts to hit upon some of your interests about difference between subjective and objective truths. But yeah, I would say I can prove it to people, and I would be hard. I mean, it's not to say that some Indigenous knowledge doesn't have value, because they may have done it observationally. Sure. They may have observed
absolutely 100%
work. Yeah, but they don't know how it works. Right? They'd invoke some spirit of an ancestor or something.
So I want to get back to. I want to push you on this a little bit. Yeah. So what if the retort to that was the whole concept of proof itself is a construct, if you will? It's a Western idea when
it is a Western idea.
Yeah. So it's a Western idea. So why would you privilege a Western idea over an Indigenous science?
Because it works.
But we know Indigenous science works too.
No,
it's like people have
some of it. Some of it does, but a vast majority of it is complete hogwash, right? It's just mythical thinking. I mean, it's just. I mean, sorry, but if we're going to start talking about paranormal, and we're going to talk about spiritualization of I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Yes, you're right. Okay, so the whole of Western traditions of science, it's emerged from what Jacobean England essentially, and that's just a bit of luck. But it does happen to apply all across the world to any society. I mean, which nation put probes on the moon most recently? I don't think it was the United Kingdom where the Enlightenment began, or Scotland for that matter, I should say. So the thing about science is that anyone, anywhere, can use it. So I don't understand this attempt to kind of defenestrate science on the basis of political views. I mean, it's just tedious, right? I mean, why don't those people stop using their cell phones and stop going into concrete and glass buildings?
Use smoke signals, maybe.
Yeah. Let them use whatever. If they want to use those technologies, go ahead, but they're not going to, right? And when you go to see a doctor, and we could talk about doctors, when you go to see a doctor, you're hoping that they're going to prescribe you a medication, and that medication is going to work. And you're lucky because we know how to make the molecules that are in that medication. If we didn't, we wouldn't be able to do that, right?
I really wish someone would invite me to debate issues like this, where I take the other side of the issue and try to truly make the best side possible, the best argument possible.
Yeah.
I would love to do that. I think it'd be a lot of fun. So what is your response to part of the problem is that you're white, heterosexual male.
No, I'm homosexual male, though. I'm homosexual male.
Okay, well that.
Oh yeah, in my case, I mean, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You're putting me in that position, right? So yeah, because I want to have at least one of those points on the scale of oppression. Does that count anymore?
Not as much as other qualities. So what is your response to the fact that the reason that if you only bought into it, if you only started with belief, then you would see that Indigenous science is the way to go. I mean, that's why we're making these mandates. We're not making these mandates for political reasons. We're making these mandates because the people who are making the mandates at the University of Toronto genuinely believe this, and it is their genuine belief that enables them to see.
They don't genuinely believe this. Come on, Peter.
But you don't have access to you don't have access to what they genuinely believe.
Okay, I absolutely don't. And so I can't read their minds. No, but I find it very hard to believe that they would dispense with all of modern culture, essentially, in the West, in an effort to support First Nations people in their beliefs. It just seems really very peculiar. I mean, what we should be doing is bringing, science to these people, right? And let them run with it, because
colonizer. That's a very colonizing attitude. Okay, so here's my question.
So I've been told.
Yeah. So here's my question to you then. Can we not test this belief? In philosophy, sometimes you call it cash value. Can you not test this belief very, very easily, not by the fruits, but by whether or not they actually believe it? And wouldn't the best way to do that be to see what happens when their kid gets sick? Where do they go? Do they go to the witch doctor, or do they go to the University of Toronto Medical? It would, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would seem to me to be a test. It would test their belief. Yeah, right. But wouldn't that be a way to do this, to see if they actually believe it?
Yeah, it would be, wouldn't it? I don't think. Look, let's talk to some, and let's go up to Nunavut or somewhere, or Yukon, or one of the territories, and interview some folks up there. Some genuine Indigenous people, and see what they think about all of this. I mean, look, it's very easy to concede that there has been colonization in North America, and that these people have been oppressed in certain ways, and they've been economically disenfranchised, and all of that. 100%, but I think, do they want to live a long time? Do they want good health? Yes, of course they do. And the solutions work regardless of whether it's a white, Western colonial kind of concept. It works for them just as well as it works for you and me. Now, okay, you could say, well, some drugs work better in some groups of people and so on. But I mean, largely, if you take an aspirin, it works, right? Well, hopefully it does. And so we've got mountains of evidence to show that this will work. And I think people will. I don't think Indigenous people. I think we just consider they're stupid. They're not stupid. I mean, it's incredibly insulting to those people, I think, because when we show them the tools and give them the tools, they can make use of them themselves.
Yeah, of course.
I don't see anyone handing me. I mean, look, and personally, I am very interested in Indigenous culture, for instance. I mean, it's fascinating, right, for its own merits. but it doesn't compete with science, and it doesn't really have much place in science, unfortunately. And I think, so I would like to see it taught to a degree, in the sense that we bring it to students and say, you make your mind up, right? Here's the options. You can go with Enlightenment values and the the empiricist approach, or you can go with alternative ways of knowing, but that's probably going to lead you down a path that's not very fruitful. But I'm waiting for it. I mean, maybe with the Trudeau government, the next big cancer trial will be based on some, kind of ancestral wisdom. Not sure who'd enroll in that. Do you? Would you enroll your parents, say, in a
They're long
trial?
gone, but
Sorry.
yeah, no, I would not.
Or your children?
I'm going to tell you a story in a minute about my experience with Indigenous philosophy, or the people who wanted to put it in a university that I will not name, where I was teaching. But why? Okay, so if the claim is that these people don't actually believe there's any kind of parity, maybe I'm trying to think, what is the most generous thing that one can say about why these people are doing this? Is it that they think that there's some, like, you find this tree, it has some bark when you grind it up in a pedestal, and then it's like an analgesic or a salve or something, like you can make, like, I'm just trying to think, like, or is it that they think
so we should pay attention to those things, right? That's very valuable knowledge.
Yeah.
That is valuable knowledge, right?
But that's not what they're saying.
No, I don't think that's what they're saying. I mean, I'm waiting for someone to tell me what it means to teach Indigenous chemistry, right? I mean, what is it? Haitian voodoo? I mean, what are we going to do here? So somebody needs to come in.
Literally no idea.
I have no idea either. So there's a broad brush attempt to decolonize everything immediately right now, without really understanding that it just doesn't equate. It doesn't even sit comfortably in any scientific subject, because it can't resort to evidence.
So what? Yeah, can't. Okay, so that's the money line, right? Because it can't resort to evidence, and to do science, you have to resort. Science has to be the ultimate arbiter.
Yeah,
I mean, evidence needs to be the ultimate arbiter.
I would also say it's statistical, right? For every 100 beliefs that some Indigenous people around the world might have, a handful of them may, maybe even quite a high proportion, may have some validity when we come to examine them in more detail using scientific approaches, right? Because they are based on observation, but also there's going to be stuff that is just that's pointless, doesn't work. I mean, we just look back in our own history, at the different practices of the forerunners of physicians today, right? They did all sorts of barbaric things to be
leeches,
all that stuff.
So I'm trying to get myself. Okay, so is it that they want to live in peace? They feel some kind of guilt, and they want to live in peace, and they want to say they're sorry, and this is a way to.
Yeah, I think that's what's driving it in Canada. Certainly, I mean, Canadians are suffering from this tremendously now. I think it's I mean, I think the British are further ahead, because I was born in Britain, so I mean, I was raised knowing that we were evil, murderous people. Except, of course, we didn't truly believe that. I mean, we just gave the world a few things, like, I don't know, democracy, for example, the rule of law.
It's the Monty Python skit.
Yeah, that's right. The People's Front of Judea and all of that. So the internet, of course, British invention, largely, and so Tim Berners-Lee. So we've had some contributions, not least the language, but we do feel guilty, of course, about some of the things that have happened in the past. But I think every culture, pretty much, you could say, is tarnished by something in their history. But Canadians are really suffering from it in a big way right now, particularly, with the residential schools matter. That really sort of blew up a few years ago, and then we had Justin Trudeau, sort of acquiescing to those. It was just insane. There was no evidence whatsoever of any dead bodies buried in those locations in Kamloops and so on. So it's some anomalies on radar, right? So
there you go again, demanding evidence.
Yeah, I know. Well, right. Well. And frankly, I'm the sort of guy who's going to continue to demand evidence. I'm sorry, it's boring, isn't it? But I like, please.
Never say you're sorry. Never say you're sorry for demanding evidence.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
we're going to change the rules. Gravity is not what it used to be. It doesn't work the same way, because that's Newton was a colonialist, right, or something. So we're going to disprove that. So planes won't fly. Well, let's design planes without using Newton's laws of motion. Let's see what happens there. You can be on the plane, right?
Yeah, I often think if this stuff were just a little less stupid, that people would believe that they're actually doing this. But it's just so monstrously idiotic and preposterous. When you tell people that they're doing this, people say, no, they're not. That's not what they really mean by indigenous science, or that, speaking of which, what this corruption pledges of allegiance among faculty with DEI demands? What's up with that at University of Toronto?
Well, yeah. Gosh, big sigh. Well, so I think it comes down from the dean on our particular campus, and probably not the current dean, actually, probably the previous dean, who was largely responsible for chasing me out of my position, and then promptly retired. It was a good exit. But it was a great, like then they retire. No superannuated individual, probably living in. I know she's moved to the US, I understand. So
yeah,
you've taken her. Well done. She sort of invoked, I think, the idea that all faculty should now, as part of their annual review, we do an annual review, and I wrote a Substack on this, but the annual review, I mean, our advancement's supposed to be about what we've published that contributes to the literature, right?
Sure.
And as a scientist, that would mean something to do with science, right? I would presume. And I've never published, I might add, I've never published because I'm in teaching, and as soon as somebody pointed me to the literature, the pedagogical literature, I just fell about, because it's like it's just a bunch of assertions and claims, and most of it could be debunked, right? And I have colleagues that do weird stuff in that area. But anyway, so she demanded that all faculty had to write, as a component of this annual review, some kind of statement of, DEI, EDI, whatever you want to call it, and what have we done for you lately, kind of thing, in that department. So, in that area. And so, of course, I promptly put on my website, well, I think it should be dismantled. And Jordan went off, and you went off and tweeted that. And I think we got a lot of views. You can go check out my website, LeighRevers.com. It's all there. I just tried to write a balanced sort of response, which is, well, look, it's a nice idea, but it doesn't work, right? And I think that's what we've all learned lately. We've seen this happening all over the place, right? DEI, conceptually, it's kind of a nice idea. We're trying to get to a sort of more equitable world. I mean, who wouldn't want that? Every Canadian alive, every American.
You mean a more equal, a world of equal opportunity?
Yeah, well, that's what again. And this idea, there's this word game. I mean, since I read, Helen's book and all of that, I mean, it's this massive postmodern word game, and now words means that we're seeing it everywhere. And so, yeah, of course, it seems like we should want these things, but the consequence is sort of entering into some sort of belief state that denies evidence, actually, and I don't think that's right. And so I have sort of pointed out, I think we should reevaluate. Now, some people have criticized me because I call for reform, which suggests that I would keep some of the DEI infrastructure, and I'm just trying to be pleasant about it. I mean, maybe. I mean,
there's no being pleasant. You cannot be pleasant about it.
No, what is it about universities? I'm cross-appointed between two departments. One of those departments has 20 faculty and 40 administrators. 40 administrators. I mean, where are my two butlers? Right? I mean, I want a personal assistant and a driver. I mean, I'm joking, obviously, but I mean, I just don't understand what those people are doing. Right? That's costing the university roughly $4 million a year or something to maintain.
Yeah, at the University of Michigan, it's worse, and people have broken down how much DEI costs at New College in Florida. Rufo's taking that. Save them millions of dollars by dismantling that madness.
Well, right. So this is the fastest way to save money, guys. We don't need to do this, because guess what? Who'd have thought it that most of the professors at universities are very reasonable, liberal-minded people who do care about their students and do want to be kind. They don't need to be instructed about being kind, right? I think, and we try to maintain standards at the same time.
That's that piece about the pedagogy of kindness, right? That just came out.
Yeah.
Do you remember where that was? We can have Reed pull that up. It just came out, right? I can't remember off the top of my head. I read that. Okay, so what is it with the allegiance among the pledges?
Well, because everyone's got to write those things now, and then you'll be graded. It's kind of hilarious, isn't it? I would tell you that most of my colleagues, especially in my, so I'm in two departments, and the chemistry department is one of them. In the chemistry department, I'm sure.
What's the other one?
it's called the Institute of Management for Innovation, because I was involved. You remember I was involved in business before, so they put me in two areas.
Okay.
So I have to kind of report to both of them. Ironically, it's the chemistry department that really enforced the DEI this year. So they sent us the rubric, and it's listed. You could trade off maybe a publication in Nature or Science with a work that's relevant to EDI.
Oh my God. Okay, pause. That is an astonishing statement. And people who are not academics, they will not understand what you just said. That is a shocking statement. So can you just take a minute to explain that? That is just
I'll do my
flabbergasting.
best. Well, they have a kind of matrix of performance, right? And there are two calibers of people in the department, just to let you know. There's the research people and the teaching people. But let's just look at the research people. That's the sort of conventional professor most people know about, who do research, have a lab if they're a scientist, and publish. And in there, then you're graded based on sort of the top is outstanding and the bottom is insufficient. And in the outstanding column, when it talks about, what you need to have achieved in order to get to outstanding, to accomplish outstanding, then you will have to have published multiple top papers in international recognized high impact journals such as Nature, Science, and so on.
Yeah, Nature has the highest impact factor.
Yeah, well, it was a New England Journal of Medicine and things like this, right? So some very, so that's what's expected of you. But there's a sentence that says, however, contributions to DEI will also be taken into account. It doesn't say by what proportion, so I don't know. But this is just room now for people to say, well, it's quite hard to get a paper in Nature, so why don't I just knock out maybe what was it that my chair just published? It was a demographic review in geology, which, by the way, found I think about a third of people doing geology at a master's level happen to identify as LGBTQ plus.
What a coincidence! Yeah,
it's fascinating. It looks like gay people and the rest really like rocks. So I was really surprised. Because, the incidence is normally about 4% across the broader population, possibly as high as 10% in a very urban city, sort of urban environment like Toronto here, with our fantastic gay community. That's wonderful. But I don't think it's as high as 30%. So I think, some very misleading sort of figures there. And then they go publish it. It's on a website and, it'll no doubt be listed in her claims to fame when she's evaluated. So yeah, I was truly stunned by this. And colleagues of mine have definitely pointed to this being very strange. But of course, I've gone and published in the National Post, Canadian newspaper, sort of criticizing all of this. And so I'm sure
up. Reed's going to pull those up. Keep going. I just talked to Reed.
Well, yeah. What there's some of the sort of articles here. Yeah, whether U of T virtue signaling can. Yeah, I mean, basically, it's bribery, isn't it? So my view is the sort of intellectual prostitution going on here. Which is, you virtue signal correctly and you'll be paid more. So that's really my interpretation of it. And if you disagree, well, I'm sure I'm going to get really slammed this year. The good news is that the increment you get on your salary is tiny anyway, so who cares? But it is for the rest of your career, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, the fact that they bring that in just strikes me as insane, because these people are supposed to be doing science. They're not supposed to be worried about political ideologies such as this, and it shouldn't be included in their evaluation on an annual basis. And that's what's happening. So that's what I mean by that.
It's like the most obvious. So this is reaching into STEM, obviously.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, STEM is highly captive, I'd say, to the ideology. It's being pushed in STEM. I've talked to a very well-known, established former chair of biology. Lately, we have a faculty club. I bumped into him, and he said, "Leigh, I went to a meeting from some of these DEI apparatchiks came and gave us a talk, and they said basically, we're not going to let you leave until you agree that water is alive." And I'm not really sure. And he's looking at me, literally staring at me, sort of, like this, like Leigh, like sort of moves closer to me, so it invades my personal space and goes, "It's H2O." I mean, what are they talking about? And he says he looks around in the room and there were people he respected, as scientists nodding like, dumb sort of bunnies. I mean, it's really, really disturbing that
because it
people.
was a native view.
Yeah, that is, I think, because the sort of First Nations view, I think, is that, it's like the elemental kind of construction of the universe, isn't it? Earth, air, fire, and water, things of this sort. I don't know the details, but look, there's nothing wrong with any of that if it's a sort of mythical belief. I mean, it's just really interesting. Can I just say, I'm a Dungeons and Dragons fanatic, so I have absolutely
me too.
loved.
Reed just played for the first time. I love Dungeons and Dragons. That's one of my it's like my third favorite activity.
Good, excellent. Because your mythology is fascinating.
Yeah, we could talk about that all day.
Yeah, we don't have.
Do you have a group? Do you have a
group?
I do.
I have a couple. Well, unfortunately, one of them moved to New Zealand, so we have to play with him remotely, which is kind of challenging. But we still play. Fantastic game. I found that the people who play role-playing games, and probably it's true in the gaming community in general, are very much more grounded because they can differentiate between reality and fantasy. So they know when they sit down and play a game that they're fantasy, they can sort of understand fantasy and enjoy it. And then when it gets to reality, they don't have a problem with any of this. So
that's interesting.
So I think water is alive. I mean, I didn't get the details from him, and I certainly wasn't there. So I'm being a little bit unfair. I like to kind of step back and not be too aggressive about it. But he just raised his eyebrows and said, "Where's this going, Leigh?" And I said, "I absolutely don't know, but I don't see how this is sustainable." And remember, people who do science go on to be physicians, right? We talk about evidence-based medicine, and the whole of the medical profession, it seems to me, is about to undergo a revolution there because people don't know about this yet. But that'll be the next thing.
Let's talk about that. Before we do, are you familiar with this course at Rice in Afrochemistry called Afrochemistry?
Yeah, I had a look at that.
What's up with that?
Well, it's madness. Okay. So look, I'm going to say yes. There is underrepresentation in the subject of organic chemistry. I think women and people of color probably haven't been, properly foregrounded in their contributions. I'm willing to kind of reevaluate that. But other than that, i.e., historical contributions, I don't really feel there's much ground here to cover. I mean, that's just the history of science, isn't it? I mean, it's not about the subject itself. So I don't really know what they're trying to offer here, unless it's just a retrospective of maybe how, so there's been perhaps an unfair bias in how we've kind of recognized the contributions of other groups. I mean, I think you could argue that position reasonably. Sure. But it's not the subject. So what's this black carbon matters thing, or what? There's some strange things going on there. I don't think politics belongs in a science classroom. I really don't.
When I listen to you and I reflect on, this is inevitable in these conversations, my own experience, what percentage of your colleagues do you think believe this madness? I mean, actually believe it, as opposed to just virtue signal and just like, yes, we need to, land acknowledgements.
Zero.
Wait, what? Zero?
Well, yeah, because they're scientists, so they know that what I'm saying is correct. They just can't espouse these positions because they've been politicized. So, I mean,
you don't think anybody believes it? And you're like the emperor calling. You're like the little kid calling out the naked emperor, and everybody else is like,
hang on. Let's be clear here. I'm talking about my scientist colleagues.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about too.
I'm going to narrow it down because everyone says they're doing a science. I mean, even Peterson's doing a science, apparently, according to him. And it's not a hard science, right? So I
was going to say hard science is a good differentiator.
Hard science. So when we talk about physics and chemistry and some biology, but biology is a lot of statistics. So I think it softens up a great deal as you move into biology, but certainly biochemistry, molecular biology, genetics, these sorts of fields. I would say close to zero really believe this stuff. I think they recognize, however, it's important to virtue signal. I think that their careers hang on that virtue signaling. It's a way of advancement for them. We've already seen that. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't have these attempts to extract from faculty these pledges of allegiance. So they know that if they want to do well in the administration, certainly, then they have to be politically savvy, which means kind of spouting some of this. But it makes absolutely no sense most of the
so
time.
basically, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but basically they're lying. They're all lying.
For sure.
They're all cowards and liars.
I guarantee. Yeah. So that's what I've noted, right? The cowardliness of colleagues. But then scientists have always been a bit like that because they're always very cautious, you see, and quite conservative. Even though radical new ideas come along, they're very skeptical. I mean, that's our nature, right? So I don't, in some senses, I don't blame them. But yes, they're very, they are. I don't think, I mean, the only reason I can speak up really is because I've reached this point in my career where I've ceased to care. I don't have to worry about it quite so much. And, because I've had success elsewhere and so on. So it's just, they won't speak up. Yeah. And yet they know in their heart, they're the people who know in their hearts that a lot of this is corrupt. So that's what I'm calling out.
That's the word. Yeah, that's the word, corrupt.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, the whole thing is corrupt. I would say the whole thing.
I've been saying that for over a decade. The whole thing is corrupt. The peer review process, the systems, the institutions, the pledges, the politicization, the weaponization of it's all a corruption. The plagiarism scandals.
But it didn't matter. It didn't matter, Peter, in the subjects that you were in, because that's what we all thought professors in those fields would talk about. And it's okay. It doesn't affect anybody. But as soon as you start to infect, people who are studying for medical degrees based on science and things of that nature, then you really are going to affect the broader population. I mean, do you really want to trust? I mean, you want to trust your doctor, don't you? I mean, you want it to be based on evidence and so on. So this is being slowly subverted, and it's being subverted at the University of Toronto's medical school. It's very clear to me because I've interviewed people and had conversations lately about that. There's been a softening of standards. People are being let in now with all sorts of ideologically sort of really quite aggressive activist views. To the point where doctors are moving away from, they're disinterested in treating and caring for, let's say, white middle-class people, white middle-class Canadians. It's not in their interests. They're much more interested in dealing with impoverished, kind of groups and marginalized groups, because that's how to kind of virtue signal your way into medical school now, rather than having to do hard subjects and do well in those hard subjects. I mean, it's just really very scary. I mean, we've got a veneer of top talent in Toronto, right, who are all about to retire in the next handful of years, right? So all these people who've built, I'd say, the kind of international reputation of this city, which has spectacular hospitals in pediatric medicine, in oncology, and immunology. They're all on the verge of retiring. They've actually hung on much longer than they might otherwise. They're in their 70s, many of them, and this departure is going to happen soon. And then it's going to be revealed that the cohort that comes behind will have very different views. Once a doctor can't tell the difference between a male and a female, I would say we're in trouble. So going back to the point though about whether my scientist friends really believe this, I don't think they really believe it. I think they believe in the virtues of, pursuing equity, which they interpret to mean, it's equality. I think they bought into that, and they're willing to buy into that so long as it doesn't really affect their publication record or whatever else, or might even garner them some notoriety for publishing in the literature about such things. I think, but many of them, for the statement that they have to do each year, they're going to ChatGPT and having it written. Which is academic. Where's the academic integrity in that?
Yeah. So I know that part of the problem that I faced in this space for a long time, I don't face it anymore at all. But people would say, well, that's just not true. None of that stuff is happening. It's kind of like the transitioning children. It's just not true. It's not happening. Oh, it's happening. It's a good thing it's happening. So, and I've made the prediction repeatedly about I can't speak to Canadians. I'm not familiar with the economic situation there, but in the United States, that once we start to really feel the effects of this profligate spending, that people are going to say, well, nobody could have foreseen this. I remember once when I moved out of Louisiana, I moved from Louisiana to Portland, and I used to read the Times-Picayune every day with my morning coffee. And I cannot even tell you how many articles I read about, the levee collapsing and the dams, and we need to build infrastructure. And then Hurricane Katrina hit, and I remember listening to the radio, and actually that's when I used to listen to NPR all the time, and George Bush was on and said, nobody could have foreseen this. Like it, no, no. And I just think I was like, what are you talking about? There were constant articles in the, I mean, but okay. So I want to concretize this a little bit. So what is this thing about students about the word addiction when discussing narcotics to medical students?
Well, that came up. Yeah, that came up in a recent conversation I had with a colleague who has taught at McMaster, actually, and she explained to me that when talking about addiction medicine and narcotics and so on, that you can't now refer to addiction because, well, essentially the view is that people are entitled to their euphoria. And therefore, you're sort of marginalizing them, or you're kind of medicalizing them in a sort of a way. You're pathologizing them, I suppose. It's pejorative, right? So you can't use addiction, for instance. Although, I mean, that word has a value and meaning, and I don't know what's wrong with it. I mean,
what's the word? What do you use if not? I mean, is it? Do you make up an?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know what they're using instead. Usage, I guess. It's just drug usage rather than addiction, because the addiction suggests that it's not in their control, and right, they can't give it. It's got all of these sort of associations, does it not? Right? He's addicted to something, or she's addicted to something.
But yeah, that's why they go to seek help.
Yeah, well, of course it is. But also treatment.
I mean,
you have to be careful about the use of the word treatment, because then, do they need treatment really? So this idea that people are entitled to these experiences, they've chosen free will, right, to experience various narcotics. Maybe they're, opioids, this sort of thing. I mean, we've got this widespread use now with fentanyl and everything else. And then you learn these stories. Anyway, so look, these are related stories that have been related to me. So I don't have firsthand experience. What I do have firsthand experience of, though, because, I was recently with I was going to say Eric Kaufman, our friend Eric Kaufman, just got his new book.
Oh yeah, Eric's a great guy. Yeah.
There it is. Yeah. He's got that book out.
Fantastic.
And we were chatting, and he was having a debate about meritocracy. And his opponent was pointing out that meritocracy doesn't exist because who decides on merit, and therefore it's a value judgment, and who do we trust to decide on merit? I mean, obviously, you ought to trust experts. I mean, that would be kind of a good way to do it, but there's a death of expertise that seems to have arisen. Anyway, so we were talking a little bit about that. Anyway, I went back and I kind of thought about my own teaching, and I thought, well, surely there is a bar of merit in my teaching, because I've been teaching the same subject for a decade. And I would say, the examinations that would be the test of your performance in that course, could interchange those exams across a decade. And, people who did well back in 2015 could do well today, probably a little bit better, because I might have made them a bit easier. So surely there is a bar. That is a reasonable bar that everyone could agree is satisfactory as a way to say, well, this person knows this subject, right? So I felt like merit really, you could prove there was merit, but then I started looking at accommodations, right? You familiar with this?
Yes.
Yeah, and in 2015, I had one person who had an accommodation. My class size is always somewhere between 50 and 100 people in the second year. And this year it's 11%. So
that's low. I'm surprised it's not higher. So
well, it's Canada, so maybe it's not as advanced as it is down south.
Advanced, yes.
Yeah.
Two things. We're coming up on it out. Do you have a little more time? You have a little more time?
Yeah, sure.
Can I tell you a quick story? So I was at a university in Portland I will not name, And although one can probably imagine the name of that university effortlessly. And one of my colleagues was delivering a public talk about why we need Indigenous philosophy.
Okay, right.
Yeah, and I literally have no problem with that. In fact, probably a great idea. I mean, the more traditions and diverse ideas and thoughts,
Agreed.
etc., we can get, the richer the tradition will be, and the more students will learn, and I could learn from it. It's great, fantastic. And he said a few things were fascinating to me. One was that he eventually wanted to not teach this class because it should be taken over by someone who was Native American. He thought it was disrespectful. Somebody in the audience said something that blew my mind. And this person was also worked in an administrative capacity. He said that he loved the idea of Native American philosophy, but he was very worried and actually at the point of being upset that colonialists and settlers ask questions and challenge it. Because in philosophy, there's a dialectic, there are counterexamples, there's, you question things, you challenge. And he thought that was unsettling, to say the least. I think he's angry was the word that he used. And that he didn't think that Native American philosophy should be subject to that. So in other words, it should be exempt from the rules of everything else.
I find that hard. I really do, because I think just the nature of being a human being is surely to experience curiosity. And so curiosity leads to questions.
That's very interesting. That's super interesting thing that's a really interesting thing. Somebody said to me, I'm not going to say his name because he moves in the public space. He's a musician. Somebody said to me just last night, I had dinner with him, and he said that when music is completely captured ideologically, but one thing he's noticed, and he always keeps his mouth shut, and he watches. I'm trying to say this without giving away the name of the person or giving any indication, but basically he said one thing he noticed from these conversations was that nobody asks any questions. People kind of share their lived experience, and then that's it. There are no questions. And that was just so striking to me, this lack of a question. The mechanism of questioning was just removed, which brings me, by the way, as a segue, tell me about the SSG, the Spectrum Street Epistemology incident. This is fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, quick sort of backgrounder here. So I when I went through the sort of period of cancellation, if you will, or whatever you want to call it, or just stepping away to concentrate on teaching and not do administration any longer, people came to me and started telling me, "Oh, do you know about these people?" Such as Douglas Murray, and I started, amazingly, I didn't know who he was, and then I kind of started following him, and then I saw Douglas Murray in a conversation with you, and I thought, who's this guy that looks like Jacques Derrida, or a modern day version of Jacques Derrida? Yeah, I know, I knew you would be. Well, you do have somewhat of a similarity, actually. Just talk a lot more sense. And so I watched that it was on Woke, essentially, and that led me down the path of reading the books, Andrew Doyle, for example, and Eric Kaufman, and all the usual suspects. Yeah, there you go. See, you don't think? Okay, well,
maybe a little bit. Yeah,
maybe a little bit. Yeah. Well, he was French, wasn't he? I mean, goodness. Okay, so and so having read the books, of course, then I came across your work, of course, and I started following you and seeing all your street epistemology, and I thought, this is fantastic. And as one of the things that I've been asked to do. Well, it's just great fun, right? I love the fact that it's a gamification of an intellectual exercise, right? I hadn't seen that done. And I thought, I must do this. And people, called me out and said I was doing it as a stunt. Great. Well, maybe it was a stunt in a way, but I mean, the point was that we've been asked to come up with entertainment for members of the community, so the student community. And I thought I'd contribute and do a street epistemology session. So we did that. But then, of course, there were complaints.
Just back to the stunt thing. When I had chemistry in high school, the teacher would do kind of crazy stunts with fires and Bunsen burners. And okay, so people complained.
Yeah, it's too interesting.
I don't think it's a stunt, for the record, but
no, It's just a technique that the professors will use, right? They want to engage you by drawing your attention to
Exactly.
something interesting.
Precisely.
God forbid that you do something interesting in a classroom or on a university campus that people actually enjoyed, because in that room at that time, we had about 50 people, and I had at least a dozen of them playing the game because we ran out of room on the lines, right? For people to stand on. But we started off softly with some simple claims, vegans are morally superior to vegetarians, things of this sort.
Ooh.
Yeah, that didn't upset anybody at that point. Then we got on to, well, anyway, and I got cross-examined by my chair, Lindsay Shanebaum.
Okay, hold on. Before you go, what other claims did you do, and what were the?
Well, that's the ones that there was a whole bunch, right? So it went down a particular path. It got a little bit more political, a bit more interesting as we progressed. So I think the one that pulled the trigger on the complaints, it started with Jordan Peterson requires media training. And that was too political, and I should have known better. And I thought, well, that's perfectly reasonable subject for debate. Actually, he's a very big figure.
He's been brought up on charges. His license is in. Yeah.
So I wanted to see what people thought, and of course, we did have people on both sides of that. So that was perfectly. I mean, it's always boring if everyone's on the same side. So we had responses,
1000%.
but I was called out. It was inappropriate for the setting. Students weren't prepared for this. If you can have a debate on campus, but you need to allow them to prepare. So if it's going to be something heavily politicized like that's going to cause discomfort to students, you mustn't do it. So of course, this came after. I didn't know this. I mean, it seemed perfectly legit to me. We ended up with, of course, something more radical. We started talking about there were alternative ways of doing science beyond the Western tradition was one. Which I thought was interesting because some people felt there were other ways of doing science.
And did people step on the strongly disagree line for that, or were they too afraid?
No, some people did. I mean, these were science students, so some did. Wow. Then we talked about the political bias within science, or that science was inherently a white patriarchal construct, or something like that.
So you facilitated a dialogue in which you
remained neutral.
You're good, great. That's you have to, yeah. So you remain neutral. You facilitated a conversation across the divide. You looked in Spectrum. You did Spectrum Street Epistemology, which we go all
just
around the world.
Just as you would do. Yeah, we did the boards as well. Write down your best arguments.
Awesome.
The other, we tried that too. That's fantastic. I mean, it was great.
That was Reed's idea, by the way.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I really enjoy that part of it. It really kind of unwraps it a little bit further and gets the participants to really think a bit harder about what the other position is. So we did that as well, and I thought that was excellent. So all in all, I thought I had a very successful afternoon. I think more people were interested in what I was doing than any of the other things. I mean, they had coloring books, right, on other tables, and they had jigsaws and things.
Coloring books.
Yeah, coloring books. I got photographs of that. There were microscopes that you could color in with crayons. So we're talking about the infantilization, you see, of education as well. I really think that's an insult to young people.
So go back. So what happened then as a consequence of the you doing Spectrum Street Epistemology?
Well, I was just, kind of turfed off the committee essentially, or at least, asked, do I want to continue on the committee? And to which I said, no, thanks. Your behavior has been noted. Essentially, I mean, it's deranged 1984 kind of stuff. What's really interesting, what's interesting about it is how the chair sort of responds to this. It's like, Leigh, why would you do this? Right? Because, I have lots of compassion, and I really want to understand how you came to the conclusion that this was a good idea. Do you see what I mean? It's like, we can have this discussion, and I can try to understand your positionality. I mean, there's a great deal of this sort of, the endless, bottomless compassion, which, it's why is it always second-class minds that are doing this stuff? I mean, I just find it so. It's just
very almost universally, mediocre minds universally across the board. The people who
This is
are espousing
relying
these
on that. It's
ideas.
like, I'm just going to
Mediocre.
emotionally appeal to you because you're not a good person if you don't think in the way that I think. And it's, how did you get to this point of thinking the way you think? Because this is perfectly legit. I mean, sorry, but students should go to university, learn how to think, and argue their positions. And if they, vociferously disagree, then let's hear it. Right? You shouldn't be afraid. There's too much fragility, literally being entertained. I mean, it's been amplified. Right? We amplify fragility. And we need Jonathan Haidt's, kind of guidance here. I mean, I read his books too, and it's quite clear that's happening. We can't protect them from the real world. We should be creating an environment at university that prepares them for the real world, and that will be a world full of difficulties and adversity, and they're not being prepared for that. So yeah, I mean, it was a very strange experience to sit in that meeting. Clearly, I was being told off. Don't do it again. You probably don't want to be in that committee any longer. And, I just doubled down on it really, because then I went and wrote a piece for the National Post and just declared that this was stupid. And I think the majority of people who read that article tended to agree. I mean, obviously some people won't, but I think the broader, the everyday Canadian just looks at that and goes, this is really silly. We can't. And so I think at the end of that meeting, she told me, you should limit yourself to claims such as, pineapple belongs on pizza. Wow, that's exciting. Gosh, that's radical. That's what
matters
a debate.
Of taste.
Well, matters of taste, right? I mean, Italians, of course, get very upset about that.
Yeah.
So you could say even that's off the agenda if you're an Italian. So yeah, I just found that a really curious experience. I just knew at that point I was doing the wrong job. I mean, I'll continue to do this for a while, but
or you're doing the right job with the wrong people.
Yeah, I'm doing the right job with the wrong people. Yeah, I'm going to make all my chemistry lectures available online and let people have it for free, and then let's just educate the world. It's what Peterson's going to do. It's what others are doing. But I find it crazy that we found ourselves at this point. I mean, these are, it prides itself, my university, in being the top university in Canada, right? The top university in Canada, and not only that, the top university in STEM. And it's
sad.
And
what
it
a bunch of
permits
sad.
Very sad, very sad. So anyway, we can commiserate over that for as long as we like, but I think it doesn't really. I mean, it doesn't really address this infantilization. I think the other thing I'd point out, one example of this, and I think you probably saw this earlier, is the mitosis song, which one of my colleagues at not my department, but the department I was formerly associated with biology, and there's someone there who purports to do pedagogy, and publishes, meaning, idea laundering, as you've correctly pointed out. But one of the things I thought was absolutely amusing is that they decided to explain to students how mitosis works, which is cell division in biology, by putting it to music. And the music they chose was Do Re Mi from The Sound of Music. So that's a priceless kind of moment of, this is 18-year-olds learning about biology. Oh, do we have it?
Play a few seconds of it there, Reed. Thanks.
Let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. When you read, you begin with ABC. Cell division begins with GSG, GSG, GSG.
You got it now.
Okay, Reed, I can't take it anymore.
I can't take it anymore either.
Yeah, okay.
So, you can see, well, I haven't done an organic chemistry song yet.
Well, that's a shortcoming. Yeah, I need to rectify that.
But yeah, well, I'm tempted to. Mine will be to some electronic dance music, no doubt, because I like DJing and stuff.
Does it bum you out that our universities have become largely farces, that they
have totally
betrayed
totally
betrayed the public trust? They've shat on the meritocracy.
Commercialization of education is my fun. I'm actually quite left wing. I mean, that's, if we can use that terminology. It means something different in the UK, but I really do believe that education should be provided for. And certainly in my era, which is a long time ago now. But I was entirely, the government paid for my education, right? And so you won a place at university.
Mine too.
A tremendous opportunity, and you realize that you had to work hard because otherwise you'd be turfed out. And so there was no sort of entitlement really that we see today. And the entitlement is not, you can't blame the students in a way, because they're borrowing all this money to go to this university to get this credential. And it's an appalling sort of situation to start off your career with a huge debt. And so, of course, they want the best and they want it now and give it to me and I need A's. And there's always going to be that pressure, the demand from the students. I mean, it's inevitable. It's human nature. So, I just have seen that this commercialization, which stems from American universities, I'm afraid to say, and it's happened in Britain as well now, means you're paying for this. But then, the value of the proposition is declining. And professors are less interested, I think, because they get endless cries of this adversity or that adversity. Deadlines have ceased to exist except in Narnia. There's no such thing. You set a deadline. What's the point of a deadline any longer? It was called a deadline for a reason, I think, historically, right? That you came to the end of it. But no, you just get extensions now. Everything's an extension. People have, they talk about examinations being an oppressive regime. It is quite stressful to do university. But I mean, if you don't prepare people for stressful environments, how are they going to deal with the workplace? How are they going to deal with an interview for a job? How are they going to deal with the ER when they have to make a decision about the life of someone on the operating table? So I think, why are we trying to prevent people from experiencing stress? Right, especially they're young people. These are the people best able to handle stress, actually, at least physiologically speaking. And yet we're saying, no, you can have twice as much time in your examination and things like this. I'm just wholly appalled, actually. And I think the students are paying for this. I mean, they're paying good money, increasingly more money, for something that's more and more valueless, as I see it. And they're not really learning how to think. So, I mean, those are my perspectives. Yeah. So
I agree. I agree.
So I'm sort of done with it in a sense. I will continue to do what I love doing, which is teaching the subject. But the direction of the universities, it's got to change. And so I think in Canada, we might see a change because there will be a transition in government, I think, pretty clearly. The Conservatives are slated to come in and remove this nonsense that, Justin Trudeau has presided over all of this for the last, decade or so. I've been here for 2.5 decades, and I can tell you it's got far, far worse.
No, for sure.
And even, so, but it's got to change. That's where I'd go with this. The other one thing I wanted to mention was it's at the federal level as well, in terms of the Canadian research chairs. Are you familiar with this? This is where federal funding. So we have, did you have that? I mean, you have federal funding for chairships?
No. We have federal funding for universities. You have endowed chairs, private. You have, I don't know the Canadian academic system.
Okay. So, the federal government gives a bunch of money, which is to provide chairs. There's an endowment for a chair, and it's provided by the federal government. And so the rules, the DEI rules around that are draconian, right? And so this is why people like Gadsad and other very well-known figures are no longer Canadian research chairs, right? Because they don't tick the right boxes. I mean, they're demanding 50-50.
That's what he told me.
50-50 equity, gender equity. They want to see representation from all groups. I mean,
he's a Lebanese Jew.
Yeah, I know. It's insane. A colleague of mine who was a CRC no longer is. He showed me a screenshot of an email from the VP research saying, sorry, you're really very, very qualified for a chairship, but you're not going to get one because we've got to fill our quotas, essentially, our gender quotas and our equity quotas. It's just, it's deranged, it's corrupt, and people you're really not paying for the best now. You're not getting.
That's why I've said repeatedly and emphatically, and in fact, just 2 interviews I posted today. The whole place needs to be burned to the ground. That's a conversation we can have another time. I'd love to have that. Yeah, I had a little debate with Kathleen. I'm ready. I'm ready to learn chemistry. I have actually. Oh, by the way, I have one quick question I want to end on. So, did you see that clip that went uber viral on Joe Rogan?
Yeah, I did.
What the fuck is that about?
Well, I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said the F word on that one, because it is truly a nonsense. I mean, the guy's a nincompoop, right? So
I'm going to start using that word. That's a great word.
It's a great word. Yeah, Douglas Murray uses it frequently, and I think it's a perfect description. This is someone who's famous, right? I mean, because we know.
Reed, pull this up, Reed. Pull it up.
We know actors know a great deal about science.
So explain.
He's gonna pull it up.
Yeah. While Reed pulls this up, it's a recent Joe Rogan clip. Yeah, that's the clip. I don't know. Should we watch some of this, or what do you think? Or is it just too stupid?
I'll tell you.
I have no idea what the guy's talking about.
Is this the bit on the periodic table?
Yeah.
When you say rebuild the periodic table,
Here we go.
Specifically.
Well, the way the periodic table is laid out, the periodic table they have now,
Let's see.
it looks like a box. It looks like a straight
It
box.
looks like a box.
They don't show that hydrogen has the same tone as carbon.
What do you mean? Just
by
stop
tone?
there.
Same tone.
Yeah. What do you mean by tone? Look, he goes. I've seen this. Right. It is monumentally stupid. Okay. I mean, there's no other way around it. There's a reason why the periodic table is a box, right? And it's because there are two dimensions that we're interested in when comparing one element to the next, right? And it's to do with the electron behaviors and the number of electrons. And so going left to right, you have a different number of electrons in the outer shell, and going from top to bottom, you're in different shells of the electron structure. So there's two dimensions of a special interest. So having everything vertically, let's say, where carbon is directly above silicon, is really important. And the periodic table is a roadmap to understand all of chemistry, right? So we use it as a roadmap. And then he presents this one which looks like there's one later where it's a spiral or something. I mean, it's the most utterly unhelpful kind of representation of the periodic table, and is not useful. There it is. This is totally not, it's just not useful, right? I mean, I can't see groups. I guess they might be in colors. I don't know. Anyway, look, nothing wrong with it. It's an art project. It's very interesting in that sense. But it's I mean, there are chemists who are just literally, skewing their eyeballs over this, I'm sure, all over the world at this point. But yeah, anyway, look, we can get to a long conversation.
What is this stuff about the frequency he's talking about? Like, what's that about?
Well, it's just it's got nothing to do with anything. I mean, okay. So the argument goes. Okay, first of all, he identifies, I think, that every element has a specific spectrum. Okay, so that's true. This is how we know what makes up an atmosphere on an exoplanet, right? Because we can actually look at the light that filters through, and by the absorption of particular wavelengths, we know that certain elements are in that particular atmosphere. So, because we know that the elements in the periodic table have unique kind of absorbances, right? So matter interacts with light, and depending on what the element is, it'll absorb a particular wavelength of light. So he starts with that and talks about the absorption of hydrogen, I think, hydrogen absorption lines. And then he says, well, if you divide the wavelength, I think he says, or was it the frequency? I can't remember, by 2, and then you convert it to a sound, which is a completely different type of physical kind of phenomena.
Yeah, that's what struck me. That's what struck me about it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, sound waves are propagated through the atmosphere, through air, through right. I mean, everyone knows no one can hear you scream in space, right? That's because there's a vacuum, right? But light travels through a vacuum. It's not the same thing at all. So I don't even know. Like, we got a whole orchestra, have we, of elements now, and they're all sort of in tune, are they, or something? So it was just utterly. It was an affront. It was a complete affront.
He should be given a university position immediately.
Yeah,
at Portland State, then fast track him for tenure.
I know. Well, he'll be a Nobel laureate before you know it. Quite
immediately.
Doesn't he talk about non-binary as well at some point? Or I'm worried that carbon's a bit gender conforming, to be honest, and we need to kind of change that. So yeah, I mean, look, we do like categories, right? In chemistry, let's say we do categorize things, and of course, if you're a postmodernist, you hate categories. You like to blur. I mean,
Yeah.
Helen has told you all about this, right? So you like to
Yeah.
blur those boundaries, and they're doing it all the time. I mean, some of the things I talk about, it does make me want to chuckle, because when I have to teach students about nuclear magnetic resonance, right, which is this whole approach to establishing the structure of a molecule, we examine the spectrum. So the peaks fall on a spectrum, and then we have to talk about where they are on the spectrum. So you can imagine how that might be interpreted by some folks. Before I go, and I ought to share this with you, but I want to see
Please.
you respond to this. Earlier on, we talked about proteins. So proteins are carbon based, and much of your body is made of protein. Not entirely, of course, there are other molecules, but proteins are very important. So providing structure to your cells and things like this. And so how is a protein made? It's made of amino acids, and the amino acids join together like beads on a chain. And then the chain itself folds on top of itself, like as if you were to drop a chain on the floor and it sort of crumpled into a pile, So, but if you imagine the beads being joined together, chemists can do that too. So we can take amino acids and we can physically plug them together. But the thing about this, and I'll hold my hand up to show, is an amino acid has two ends, so my thumb and my forefinger. And if we want to join them in a chain, and he says, I'm going to put this like this, you want them to join together like this, and then continue on. But they can join together like this, right? So they can kind of make a circle, if you will. These are called diketopiperazines. But anyway, so amino acids, that's an unwanted reaction for a chemist, because he wants to make proteins. He doesn't want to make dimers, as they're called. And so I was trying to explain this to students one time. And I said, well, many of you in the class are biologists, so you'll know about earthworms. And, so this is like hermaphrodites. And we know that when they procreate, they kind of approach each other from different directions, don't they? And then they sort of procreate at both ends, and that's essentially what this reaction is. It's kind of the reaction has each molecule has a donating end and a receiving end, so there's a sort of sexual connotation there. Well, you can imagine immediately I was called out because I insulted intersex people by comparing a molecule to a hermaphrodite. Now, there are no hermaphrodites in the human species, so I'm not quite sure how. But apparently, people with this condition could be, really discombobulated by your description. I thought, I'm just trying to get people to remember, right, what I'm talking about. Maybe they'll remember earthworms and go, I remember that when Revers talked about, hermaphrodites. So I observed that was an occasion I observed, students were kind of upset with me. So
that's offense by proxy. That's what I call it.
Yeah, it's sort of it's no intention. So you can't crack a joke and you can't be fun. And if you can't be fun, people get even more bored with your subject, and so they're not going to be engaged and lose interest. And I think it bothers me immensely, because this is such a ridiculous sideshow from the beauty and magic of the subject, right? Which is astonishing and fantastic. And so I'm just going to say I love chemistry very much. I hope I can impart to you some of that one day if we can get together and talk about it. But
I appreciate it.
We could chat about it.
Yeah, you've now got me thinking, and I'm also gonna ask Jerry Coyne's a good friend of mine. I'm gonna ask him about the carbon in life and a few other people. But Leigh,
it's been
it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I appreciate it, and I'm sorry you've been through so much shit with these lunatics, but this too shall pass. This too shall pass. So a lot of people are sharing those experiences, and I'm so grateful that you came on and let other people know. Where can people find you? Where can people find your stuff?
Yeah, well, of course, I'm active on Substack these days, so and it's all through my website, so leighrevers.com, but go check out my Substack. It's about half dozen articles, and I continue to write, and will do so. Hope people enjoy those, many of them perspectives, personal experiences, but more broadly as well. So thanks. A Bosch job. Hope you like that. There's a bit of a Hieronymus Bosch painting there, and interestingly, it's about subterfuge. So I talk a little bit about that. Notice there's a pickpocket in that image on that particular screen. Okay, well, look, fantastic to actually have the opportunity to talk to you, Peter. I really appreciate your time, and I know you've got more to do today. I see you've got another one coming up, so I look forward to that.
One could say that. Could you just leave? Don't close out yet. Stay there. Keep the browser open, and we'll continue our conversation. And thanks to Reed, thanks to our audience, and appreciate you coming coming on, Leigh, and hopefully I'll be in Toronto with Reed, and I'll be up there and hanging out, and
Yeah,
we can
please
do some
come out
Spectrum
sometime.
Street Epistemology.
Yeah, let's do some street epistemology. I'll be in Toronto for a while, and I know some good restaurants and places to go. So
Great. Fantastic.
always-
All right.
always
Thanks.
good
All
to-
right. Thanks again. Thanks, Reed. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Don't hang up on us. Thank you for watching. Everything we do is under the umbrella of the National Progress Alliance, nationalprogressalliance.org. It's a nonprofit, independent 501c3. Your generous donations keep us going and keep fueling content like this. So please help us out. Make a donation. We very much appreciate it. Thank you.